The Foundation for Water Research is an independent community of professionals from across the water sector and related scientific specialisms. They come together for deliberative discussions to support the development of interdisciplinary solutions to freshwater challenges. The community provides guidance and strategic thought leadership for the institution of environmental sciences water activities and collaborates with the wider IES family on issues related to land, air, and policy implementation. The community champions a systems approach to ensure that freshwater solutions are holistic and multifunctional, and is informed by 3 technical panels, including the Water, Environment and Ecosystem Services Technical Panel, who has convened this group. This is a facilitated discussion exploring how we can overcome barriers to the implementation of nature-based solutions in the water sector. The roundtable will be preceded by a short presentation exploring research into the current barriers to implementing nature-based solutions, which will set the scene for the discussion and allow for a solution focus. Nature-based solutions in the water environment are wide-ranging and can be used to tackle a number of key challenges facing the sector, including flood risk management, nutrient neutrality, and water quality improvement. Despite the recognized benefits of nature-based solutions, there is still a lack of widespread uptake and a need for more concerted effort to support. There is no live audience, but we are recording the discussion and will post on our website and YouTube channel. We will now hear from Amina Abubakar before kicking straight off with the agenda sent through.
Thanks, Monica. So this is really to form a background to hopefully stimulate the conversations today. And in terms of setting the challenges and the context, as we know, the water environment is facing ever-growing pressures around too much water, too little water, too dirty water. And of course, added to that is things like population growth, aging infrastructure, climate change, biodiversity crisis, and many other issues. And these are too many problems for us to be, for one sector or one stakeholder group to be able to solve on their own. The scale is just too huge. And in order for us to address this effectively, water companies, stakeholders need to work together in new and collaborative ways, joining forces really to tackle these issues in a more joined up way. And one way to do that is through nature-based solutions. And I should say that in terms of the definition of nature-based solutions, I'm using a sort of broader umbrella description, very much in line with the IUCN, which is not just natural, fully natural solutions, but also hybrid solutions. And this is a really important description because nature-based solutions are multifunctional in their purpose. They can deliver multiple improvements at any one time. For example, water quality as well as flood reduction, biodiversity improvements. And through that, they provide a multitude of benefits to society, the environment, and to the economy. And in fact, their value is maximized when we can integrate them and hybridize them with the built environment and engineered solutions, because we know we can't just talk about rewilding and big landscape solutions that don't include the built environment. It's really about the synergies and trade-offs that we can optimize with traditional infrastructure to reduce the impact on carbon intensive measures, but also provide those hybrid and integrated solutions that can be not just cost effective, but also much more resilient to things like climate change. Their value is also maximized when we look at them in the landscape and when we work through collaboration in terms of planning, delivery, operation, and maintenance, but much better coordination in the landscape as well. And because they're multifunctional and attract multiple benefits, they can also attract multiple investment and joined up funding. By aggregating their diverse benefits and functions, nature-based solutions can actually become an attractive proposition to a number of investors and funding mechanisms. And they can drive value, therefore, to a lot of stakeholders that put funding into this, including customers from water companies. And we know this in the Rivers Trust because we work with a lot of these stakeholders in the landscapes, and we attract numerous funding sources to deliver the projects on the ground. So it's a no-brainer that they can help us to achieve quite a lot of the resilience we need to address, particularly in the water environment for the future. But we know they're not a business as usual approach in the water sector. We know there's lots of barriers currently preventing their uptake in terms of the implementation at scale. And these are things like limited standardization for how we design, how we build, maintain, and report on how effective these nature-based solutions are, particularly when they deliver regulatory requirements and risk reduction. But also how we commonly assess their value or don't commonly assess their value, and how they deliver multiple benefits. There's a lot of still people working in their own silos, particularly around delivery and around risk sharing. It's hugely fragmented and not really aligned in terms of how we plan, how we invest, and how we deliver or prioritize nature-based solutions for these key risks around the water environment. And in many ways, that creates this sort of perpetual culture of working in silos and risk aversion as well, a lack of trust in terms of how the evidence is shared and how these nature-based solutions can deliver against requirements. But also, the regulation and policy which can be a huge enabler, can often be inadequate and conflicting. It can be short-term and really restrict some of the opportunities. And we still see a lot of carbon bias in terms of, particularly when it comes to delivering against water requirements. And this obviously creates a knock-on effect in terms of funders and investors sometimes not really knowing. It's confusing, it's siloed, it's fragmented, not really knowing how to invest and where to invest, and how in many ways they're going to get their money back. And there isn't one barrier fits all. A lot of these barriers are working together really to prevent greater adoption of nature-based solutions, make it really difficult for decision makers, communities, investors, and regulators to really see how we can maximize the value of nature-based solutions from being fully realized. But of course, there are enablers. And those are the things that we really need to be able to promote and maximize. Things like creating local and national collaboration across multiple stakeholders. How do we start to share much more knowledge and evidence, particularly around the success stories, the good case studies that can provide trust and understanding of how nature-based solutions deliver against requirements. But we also need to work with regulators and policymakers to demonstrate how flexibility within the regulatory framework can actually incentivize nature-based solutions to be widely adopted and for these multiple benefits and multiple beneficiaries to be promoted. We need to develop much more joined up investment and delivery as well, because nature-based solutions tend to be public goods. They are cross-cutting. They don't just benefit one part of society. So we really need to understand how do we start to stimulate much more aligned planning, delivery, and looking after these features as well. And where possible, where can we maximize standardization of tools, systems, and processes? Because these help to build trust, they help to build continuity, and also dissemination of implementation. And if we take much more of an asset management approach to nature-based solutions, we can start to understand risk and also assessing the value that goes beyond just delivering particular requirements, so that we can expedite action and build much more confidence and trust in these solutions. But of course, we know, certainly within the Rivers Trust and some of the water companies we work with, there's a huge number of examples across the country and globally of where nature-based solutions are delivering. After all, nature's been here longer than we have. But we need to be able to disseminate and systematically share that knowledge and evidence so that people can understand how it could be implemented and adopted in terms of their place, their landscape, and their communities as well. This is some of the things we're trying to do with the Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions project, which is a 5-year £9 million project funded through Ofwat Innovation Fund, which is looking to mainstream some of these enablers for nature-based solutions to become much more common practice within the water sector. And we're looking to sort of inform the next price review cycle, the next planning cycle of the water industry, but also broader policy and cross-cutting sectors as well. This is really about building a better deal for society, economy, and the environment. Some of you in this call are also partners in this project. And that's how we've structured the work streams across the project around those enablers that through huge consultation building up to the bid, we were able to capture from many, many stakeholders. What do we need to do around national steer, coordination, cooperation, and aligned planning? How do we work much more closely with regulators, with Ofwat, the Environment Agency, Natural England, but also policymakers like DEFRA, to enable nature-based solutions to be much more incentivized through the regulatory frameworks? But also, how do we start to align this across different sectors, across the landscape, in terms of investment, delivery, but also operation and maintenance and risk sharing? And where possible, where can we standardize approaches to how nature-based solutions are designed and built? We've got 8 real-life tests across 8 regions in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, looking at this problem from their perspective, so that we're informing a much broader understanding of nature-based solutions as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Amina. That was great. Thanks for the summary of key barriers to nature-based solutions. I would like to start with a specific focus on the perhaps silos and the key stakeholders that need to be engaged in the delivery of these nature-based solutions. But before we jump into that, can we just have an introduction from all the members in the round table so that we have a summary of who they are and actually what they think the key barriers are going to be for nature-based solutions. So, Catherine, would you be happy to start with the intro?
Sure, of course. So my name's Kat Moncrief and I'm a policy manager at CIWEM, the Chartered Institute for Water and Environmental Management. Before CIWEM, I worked at the South East Rivers Trust. So a lot of my experience in trying to deliver nature-based solutions comes from there, where I was working with my team and with farmers and with water companies to get nature-based solutions off the ground. So I've just got a few thoughts here based on that experience. Some of the challenges, so I think I've got 3, maybe 4 challenges, which I'll try and cover in 30 seconds. So one is that I think water companies, I did a lot of work with water companies, they really want greater certainty on the outcomes that nature-based solutions can deliver. So they want to know, for example, if you've got this many X number of leaky woody dams, what's that going to do for the water company in terms of the resilience of their water supply or the improvement in the quality of their water supply. The second thing is that nature-based solutions really need to make business sense for landowners, and I really saw that coming through with landowners I was working with in Kent. So they're weighing up various different options at the moment, including BNG, ELMS, carbon markets, whether they continue food production or diversify into something else. If they're going to change what they're doing, if they're going to change land use, then they really need to have a lot of certainty and several years of funding agreed to enable them to do that. But they also need some flexibility, a kind of get out clause or something if it's not going to work for them. So that's another area around landowners. And I think it's really important to remember just how many landowners need to get on board in order to sort of to deliver nature-based solutions at scale. And no landowner is the same, very diverse group there. Amina mentioned risk sharing. I think that was my other point. So if nature-based solutions doesn't deliver the outcomes that we hope, then who bears the costs of that? So water companies, for example, need to be sure that farmers have fulfilled their commitments and done what they can, and they'll need to demonstrate to regulators that those nature-based solutions have delivered the outcomes that they were intended to deliver. So there needs to be much more flexibility in agreements, but with farmers, but also with regulation as well. And and there needs to be a way to kind of check in and adjust. And I think that all needs to be worked through. And sorry, I've gone over way more than a minute, but my final
That's okay, Kath. Thank you very much.
My final point was just about skills. So we working for the Rivers Trust, we struggled to bring in the skills that we needed at some points, and so that it's clear that we really need to bring the green into what has inherently been a kind of engineering grey sector in terms of water. So we need to kind of green our grey industry and also provide different career routes into this kind of work, because we're going to need to do a lot if we really want to get nature to solve our problems. So we need to provide different ways that different types of people at different stages can come into the sector.
Thank you very much, Kath. Thanks. Tom, if you could follow up with your introduction, 1 minute, please.
I'll do my best. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Palmer. I'm Senior Engineer at Southend City Council. I'm also project sponsor for Catchment to Coast, which is one of the 25 national DEFRA FCRIP projects. So we're delivering a lot of nature-based solutions as part of that. We've got 16 sites, 16 partners, doing lots of new things around managing flood, water quality, co-design, all sorts of things. So I won't go into detail here. I think Catherine and Amina made some really good points there. Just building on from those, I think having delivered them, there's still a lot of issues around kind of the multiple benefits. We tend to pick an approach and then add stuff on. So you do a scheme for flood benefit reasons, and then, we'll look at amenity as well. We'll do some wildflower planting, chuck some trees in, stuff like that. And there's not really a very holistic approach, which comes down to the siloed thinking of things again. Okay, there in a minute. Sorry, daughter's first day at school. So just barged in. Also, the quantifying the benefits as well. That's something we very much struggle with in terms of putting kind of monetary values. I'm just in a meeting, I'll be there in a second. To kind of get those multiple funding, because again, the current process for funding is not built to deliver nature-based solutions. It's just not, it's years behind, and trying to find the additional pots to make things get the full benefits is very, very difficult. Funding exists, it's just knowing about it, finding it, making it align, working with partners as well, very tricky. And then the last other thing I've got is the legacy as well. It's about getting people in the area to buy into what it is and why you're doing it, so that it's not just a build it and walk away approach, which a lot of engineering is. We've got massive issues with kind of capital budgets, revenue budgets in terms of construction and maintenance. And nature-based solutions is a bit of an opportunity to get that more local buy-in and maintenance and kind of adoption of features.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Really useful points. Charlie Ensor, over to you.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet everyone. I'm Charlie Ensor at the Green Finance Institute. So my experience, I was previously a project manager at the West Country Rivers Trust on a catchment management project funded by South West Water. And then most recently, I was project managing a project at the GFI Green Finance Institute on financing natural flood management, where we at the GFI sort of look at how private finance and private capital can be directed into nature outcomes, including nature-based solutions. So yeah, from Kat and Tom's sort of input just then, it's not a huge amount to add. I think a lot of the key ones sort of picked up. I think what something I'd really like to see is this kind of coordination and sort of suitable institutional structures across a sort of a suitable landscape scale and a spatial scale. And I think it's a little bit chicken and egg, but when we've got these sort of institutional structures with many different stakeholders, I think it can become a bit easier to break down silos between different organizations working within an area of sort of spatial priorities of what the nature-based solutions are to address. And I think with those sort of institutional structures and coordination and governance, etc., I think that actually goes some way to building the evidence base and the confidence in nature-based solutions, and having sort of processes around that, and not just sort of evidence-based of nature-based solutions delivering what it is they're supposed to deliver, but also the sort of the valuation of co-benefits. And I think that sort of some of the coordination also comes from, I think government as well should take a role in sort of prioritizing areas for nature-based solutions, and what are the priorities in certain areas to give that sort of guidance. But I think I really like the ideas around the sort of that asset management approach and sort of building that evidence base and confidence within a sort of spatially defined region where you can identify those actors, work together, and sort of prioritize nature-based solutions. So yeah, just a quick, I would say that was where I'll be looking at.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Excellent. Mark Betson, over to you.
Thank you, Monica. I'm Mark Betson. I work for the National Farmers Union as their water resources specialist. I'm part of a team who cover the various areas associated with water and nature, and some of the incentives that are used to attract farmers to enter into schemes. Much of what I would be saying about nature-based solutions has been covered already, particularly by Kat and by Tom. The only thing I potentially would add would be that, as well as thinking about landowners, it's important to think about those who are managing the land as well, where potentially they're not necessarily the landowner, where they're tenants. Those who are using the land to create a livelihood need to be considered in terms of nature-based solutions so that they work for them and stacks up for their businesses. And it comes on to Tom's point about delivering multiple benefits, about how these can work together to actually incentivize those who need to make business decisions based on whether these will work for them, so that they work together, the incentives, rather than work against one another, so that there's not an either or, it's an actually we can just build on this. I think that would be my point about trying to make the best and trying to encourage more land managers and landowners into nature-based solutions.
Thank you, Mark. That's a really good addition. Thank you very much. Chris, Gerard, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Jarrard. I'm the Head of Landscape Transformation at Anglian Water. I'm also the Vice President for England for the Chartered Institute for Ecology and Environmental Management. So building on a few things from Amina and Kat, I think one of the things I'm interested in is about the size and the capability of the supply chain for delivering nature-based solutions. So one facet of that is just making sure that nature-based solutions are seen as a viable option for meeting a need when they are, and that they're given the fair hearing when it comes to deciding how an organisation like us, a water company, might invest to deliver a particular outcome. But there's the skill sets that we haven't needed in the past for delivering nature-based solutions, including the expertise to engage with others who need to be involved, and landowners are a really critical part of that. A lot of the nature-based solutions that the water sector needs to deliver is going to be on third-party land, so that has all sorts of implications for land ownership, land management, planning permission, all of that sort of stuff that we need to be able to manage properly. Mm-hmm. And we also need to make sure that these nature-based solutions can be managed in the long term as well. They need a different skill set for that, to deliver both the specific need that they're delivering, but also continue to maintain the wider benefits they generate for people and wildlife as well. And of course, there's already an acknowledged green skills gap in the sector. Government tends to be thinking about renewable energy and the climate emergency when it's thinking about green skills, but we need a much bigger supply chain for building and maintaining these nature-based solutions as well, and that's a real challenge for both the water sector but for other major infrastructure projects as well as we move forward towards 2030.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Just a clarification on your first point. You mentioned size for delivering nature-based solutions. Size in terms of a scale, of a spatial coverage, or size in terms of funding, economic scale?
Well, both. I mean, my introductory points particularly around the size and the skill set and the capability and the behaviours of the supply chain, which for a water sector is traditional, obviously heavy engineering, and what we need to do to move is towards a wider appreciation of these different ways of delivering a solution. So it's about how the existing supply chain can grow, but how do we attract talent from a wider range of or parts of the economy so that it's big enough and equipped enough to deliver the needs that the UK economy requires.
Thank you, Chris. Imogen, over to you.
Morning, everybody. Nice to meet you all. You've all done a very good job of explaining some of the key barriers so far. Sorry, I'm Imogen. I work in the environment team at Ofwat, mainly focusing on biodiversity and nature-based solutions. But yeah, as you've all done a very good job of the key barriers and things, I just wanted to highlight one of the key points from our side is that collaboration and coordination altogether. Obviously, this isn't just a water sector issue, and we really want to focus on bringing in partners from cross sector, so agriculture, highways. We can see the importance of so many of these sectors, and like enabling that management and resilience of benefits for the long term. So yeah, I'll cut off there, but that's my 2 pence.
Okay, thank you, Imogen. Lovely. Laura Kitson, over to you.
Thank you, and yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Laura Kitson. I'm a manager in the Environment Agency in the flood and coastal erosion risk management part of the organisation. So my interest in nature-based solutions is very much focused on the flood quadrant of Amina's diagram of nature-based solutions. And I guess, yeah, in terms of reflections on kind of key challenges, I think I mean, yeah, that people have covered some of the key challenges that we've come across. I guess what I'm keen to kind of get across is it's not all challenges. There's things that we as an organisation and partners are already doing. So it's been great to see partners around the table. So we've been working with the Rivers Trust on the award-winning NFM hub. It's great to have Tom on the call delivering one of our flood and coastal resilience innovation projects, and also we're doing lots with the NFU at the moment on rural flood resilience. So in terms of kind of what the challenges and opportunities are, I think from an Environment Agency point of view, we've seen very much similar challenges and opportunities to what others have identified. We've had the benefit of leading a 15 million NFM investment programme, and the evaluation report on that was published in 2023, which picked up on some of those key learning points. And I guess, yeah, kind of my spoiler is the same spoiler that everyone's pulled out, that kind of there's no one thing that is kind of the key thing, either as a challenge or as an enabler. What we've seen are kind of challenges and opportunities in terms of both developing and delivering projects, and also in terms of looking after them long term. So yeah, kind of very similar perspective. What I'd be really keen to do is to be able to I guess highlight the positive things that are already going on in that space in terms of opening up investment to NFM. So we've got a new 25 million investment programme. We're looking at evidence around natural flood management, and how that can kind of make that link between what the intervention is and what particularly the flood benefit is. So there's lots we're doing in that space, as well as in the space of thinking about an asset management approach to make sure that these investments are managed and maintained and known about long term, so that they can deliver those benefits, as well as thinking about natural flood management in the context of environmental land management, to make sure that for farmers and landowners it's not an either or. Should we deliver stuff under the environmental land management scheme, or should we deliver flood outcomes? But that, yeah, my team's been working really hard to make sure that flood outcomes are integrated into the design of those new schemes. So I think, yeah, similar perspective, similar challenges, no one big thing. But I guess I'm really keen to stress that they're not just challenges that everyone's gone, hey, that's a challenge. They're challenges that we're actively working on, and we're really excited to be working in partnership on them as well.
Thank you, Laura. Flood and cost perspective. Thank you very much for that. And Rob, over to you now.
Hello, everyone. I work for the Nature Conservancy, which is a global organisation. I work in the European team as part of leading the resilient watersheds work, which is essentially creating nature-based solutions programs for to tackle water security. So this is kind of bread and butter, really, in terms of Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy. So, and I'm also leading a piece of work looking at regulatory enablers for regulated utility investment in nature-based solutions globally. So that's a TNC piece of work. And I guess, it's very difficult to say anything clever and new after all you learned people have spoken. But I guess for like what what the TNC model essentially is to look at developing a kind of a finance plan, a governance model, and bringing together kind of tools and capacity development in a geography, working with partners, and that's what we're doing in Norfolk. For me, the governance piece is really, really important. I think one of the things that I would say is that actually what we're attempting to do when we talk about nature-based solutions and blended finance, actually Nature Conservancy hasn't cracked this anywhere in the world. Our kind of global programs tend to be quite specific, quite linear in terms of who they're working, the solutions they're delivering, the client, you know, the buyers of the services being provided. These kind of blended approaches haven't really been cracked. One of the things I really observe is that we often talk about kind of collective action and blended finance, and we kind of all have common goals. So it'd be like, oh, well, we're interested in water resources or flood risk management or nutrient reduction. But actually, depending on whether you're in a regulated or unregulated outcome, where depending on even within the regulated field, you know, whether it's an SAC, protected area outcome, or Water Framework Directive good objective, these all apply different degrees of risk and therefore benefits you can claim for any nature-based solutions. So even when we think, well, we're all in a market for nutrients, actually, what the risk that appetite that a buyer is willing to have, or you know, the value of a buffer strip in terms of the amount of nutrients that you can claim from that buffer strip or for that treatment well, and varies because of the different regulatory regimes and risk appetites are implicit in that. And then if you go into the voluntary market, it gets, you know, those risk appetites change as well. And so yeah, I think one of the things is actually being, when we talk about collective action and kind of blended finance, being really clear about what are the benefits we're selling and what is the risk appetite of all those different players. And sometimes I feel like we chase the most difficult problems in the most difficult places, and therefore we're putting the highest kind of regulatory scrutiny on the nature-based solutions programs we're developing. And that, you know, and sometimes that backs us into a corner. So, you know, actually, yeah, that kind of interaction between regulation, risk, and risk appetite, I think, is a real kind of rich area for exploration.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. That's great. Thank you very much for all the contributions. As we dive deep into the discussion, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, I would like to explore now the key stakeholders that need to be engaged to effectively implement nature-based solutions. So all of you have recognized that there are silos, and as Amina mentioned, those silos need to be broken, or there is a need to actually bring a joint up planning, investment, and better partnership and networking to ensure that nature-based solutions barriers are overcome. And I guess that this first question is going to focus on who are these key stakeholders. Based on different contributions, we have highlighted that we need the landowners, but also land managers. We also need someone that represents the financial sector, because finances are key to actually make sure that everything is implemented and it takes a good port. There are actors around governance, but we have not identified who these are. And I guess that there are also actors, based on what you have said, that relate to knowledge transfer, dissemination, as Amina pointed in her presentation, as well as risks. So that quantification of the risk and then how that risk is being absorbed. But we have not really identified the actors that need to be involved. So could I have your views about who these key stakeholders should be and need to be engaged to effectively implement nature-based solutions? Perhaps, Amina, if I can put you on the spot as you have given the introduction, may I have your views on that?
Yes, I think some of them have already been mentioned, as you say, but I think because if we're talking in the context of water, water is so heavily regulated. I think the regulators are key actors in this, and specifically to the water sector, we've got Ofwat and the Environment Agency both represented on the call, but we've got Natural England, DEFRA, the director, the water inspection. I mean, there's a whole bunch of regulatory actors that need to be, and policymakers that need to be involved in that discussion. The other side of this is the sort of local authorities and the public bodies in terms of what I tend to call the infrastructure owners, from public bodies, but also national highways, national grid, but the water sector, although they're not public, they kind of are in many ways a risk authority in their own right. So I think these are key actors, because in many ways they carry the burden of statutory requirements and regulatory risks. Hence why it's really difficult for a water company as a regulated actor to navigate the regulatory hurdles that are put in front of nature-based solutions. It's much more easy to go for the tried and tested engineering approach, and it reduces process risk, it reduces issues around risk itself, and reduces long-term sort of uncertainty as well around some of these things, and puts the control right back in the water company's control. Really, it's the risk is theirs, the investment is there, and it's just much more linear. So I think the regulatory actors and policy actors are very, very important, but also the public infrastructure owners are also really important. I'm including land managers and landowners in there, because obviously land itself is an infrastructure. So these are key players, but ultimately, I think the communities themselves can play a key part in driving a lot of this. Seeing customers as part of that community is absolutely important. I love this polarizes people, but I love the story of the CSOs and the sewage map. So the River Trust published a few years ago the sewage map. This was picked up by lots of stakeholders. The information was disseminated, made accessible to all, and it was picked up, for better or worse, depending on where you stood on the side of the argument. And it created a movement, and perhaps is directly responsible for a lot of the investment we're going to see in upgrading CSOs and related infrastructure in the next few years. So there are ways that communities can play a key role in putting that pressure. When things need to happen, they will. They put the political pressure, the regulatory pressure, the pressure on the decision makers for things to happen. For me, those are the key actors.
Okay, thank you, Amina. From that point, the finances side of things, if I could have maybe the view from green finances, from maybe Charlie, is there anything in particular that you would like to highlight in terms of key stakeholders when it comes to finances or green finances for nature-based solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the finance side of things, I know you mentioned the sort of the finance sector, which I think is definitely a key stakeholder in this. But I think when we're talking about financing nature-based solutions, I think that sort of a lot of it comes down to within a certain sort of region or landscape, who are the sort of key private sector entities within that landscape, and what are their demands on or uses for water in that region, for sort of water resources, water quality, and flood risk reduction. So within an area, what are the key sort of private sector organizations, companies, bodies, trade bodies, sort of collections of organizations that are within an area that you're looking to implement nature-based solutions? And I think it's key in identifying who those organizations are and what their drivers for investment into nature-based solutions would be, or what would their drivers be to help fund nature-based solutions and sort of come in alongside public funding as well. So I think a lot of work has to be done on identifying those stakeholders, identifying actually what is their commercial interest in helping to fund nature-based solutions, and what are their sort of risk drivers, and their appetite to fund nature-based solutions, and also their confidence in nature-based solutions in delivering what it is that they would want to be delivered, whether that's water resources or water quality. So I think definitely from the finance side of things, it's more the sort of private sector buyers and being able to sort of build those potential revenue streams, but it all sort of comes down to building confidence and identifying who their stakeholders are. And I think so that's my sort of response on the sort of the financing side of things, is identify those sort of stakeholders. And then once you've done that, you can start thinking about, if you did want to attract, let's say, upfront investment, if that was deemed appropriate, then then you can start identifying some of those financing stakeholders as well. I think just on the local communities point as well, if it's okay, just sort of, I thought Amina's point around local communities was a really great one. And I think there's some definitely key stakeholders, but I think in also not only the kind of call to action that they did in sort of Amina's example, but I think as they're the sort of, especially with flood risk, perhaps they're definitely the sort of the key beneficiaries of sort of flood infrastructure. I think engaging local communities on that front and in terms of building their confidence in nature-based solutions and the ability to, let's say, reduce flood risk or also deliver on some of their other priorities. I think early sort of engagement on that front, I think is sort of key as well. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. I think Rob has his hand up and you were first, so over to you, Rob.
Well, I was just going to say specifically on the finance piece, I think one of the interesting questions for the water sector, or one of the advantages of the water sector, is it's actually really good at raising finance. And we've always kind of been slightly skeptical about the idea of having, like the dream scenario in terms of the water sector is that nature-based solutions are packaged up and part of their core business plan and therefore part of their core financing package. Because if you're raising billions of pounds in the market and you've got 100 million pounds of nature-based solutions program or 200 million pounds of nature-based, you're mitigating any risks in that broader finance mechanism that or financial approach to the markets that the water companies are making. I think there's a real risk if we get carried away with the idea of green finance for nature-based solutions for water companies, that what we do is we hive out the highest risk bits of the business plan and then somehow think we're going to get a better deal, and I don't think that'll happen. And just on the broad question about stakeholder engagement, I think don't disagree with anything that's gone ahead before, but I think also being the starting point is really the question is what we're trying to achieve, and like who are the interested parties, and there's some stakeholder mapping, depending on where you are, who you're dealing with, what the issue is, what the risks associated and the costs associated with it. Really depends on how broad you cast your stakeholder net, I would say. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think absolutely everyone at the top end and not very many people at the other end, depending on the kind of the project, the program you're trying to deliver, I would argue.
So your view is that the stakeholders are actually project specific or approach specific perhaps, and there is a need to map the stakeholders before going ahead, because those may change depending on the interaction.
I think it's massively context specific, where you are, and I think so, and within that, I think you get into some really interesting kind of demographic questions and socioeconomic questions that you have to answer. But I do think it's very specific.
One point on that first idea of investment, minimizing risk, it seems to tie quite nicely to insurance companies. Investment and risk, insurance companies are always working on those two ends together. Is this where you are heading into with your thoughts in terms of potential investment, or is it something completely different?
I think the insurance sector is problematic in the UK because it's private and because there's a massive free rider risk around it. So I know the wire flood RE is the obvious because they soak up residual risk. So flood RE is an obvious kind of investor in that space. I think other insurance companies creating a commercial proposition is really quite difficult, particularly for even more so for domestic. I know less about commercial insurance, but it's very, very difficult.
Laura, over to you.
Yeah, I think this question about stakeholders is a really interesting one. And I guess what I've seen is kind of different stakeholders being interested in kind of different questions at different levels. So, for example, at a strategic level, what we've seen is kind of interest in policymakers, from my point of view, from a flood kind of perspective, but obviously there's others. And I think what that interest is very much around kind of the evidence and the cost effectiveness. So yeah, kind of what benefits do you get from investing in natural flood management projects? How do they compare to kind of more traditional engineered schemes? So I guess at that strategic level, it's kind of like what is the opportunity for nature-based solutions? Then kind of you've got the level of, okay, if we think nature-based solutions are a good idea, where is it going to be most effective? So there's the kind of the where question. And then when you're delivering individual projects, you're kind of asking that how question. So how can these projects be delivered? And I think we've people around the table have already identified the kind of capacity and skills issue in terms of delivering these projects is a different skill set to kind of engineered projects. So yeah, what does that mean in terms of regulatory role and the planning and the permitting that's needed to get these projects up and running, maintenance? But I think key is very much engagement. So taking some learning from the NFM programme that the Environment Agency invested in previously. So that was 15 million that we invested between 2017 and 2021. That funded 60 projects across the country. And what we saw from that was kind of just looking at the proportion of time spent at a project level. The average proportion of time spent on engagement was 69% of the total project length, and delivery was 23%. So actually that's kind of a real, I suppose, interesting thing to pick up in terms of balance, that the skill set around delivering nature-based solutions is not necessarily the kind of physical construction of them, but it's very much the engagement that's needed to get them going. So yeah, that was absolutely one of the key things that we picked up in terms of skills, particularly at that project delivery level.
So those are very two interesting points. So I guess that the first one is that the evidence and the evidence on the cost effectiveness and the benefit of nature-based solutions has not properly been quantified. So we know it's beneficial, but we don't have quantitative values out there that we can use to demonstrate that perhaps are as beneficial as our engineering solutions or the solutions that may be proposed. So perhaps there is a need to develop a tool or some standards or something that actually help us quantify that. And then your second point is on knowledge transfer. And I just wanted to highlight something there, which is not everybody can do that knowledge transfer, mainly because people receiving that knowledge transfer may not trust everybody. So who will be the key actor there to transfer the knowledge to different people? And I'm wondering whether that is the Environment Agency. So you don't need to answer now, but is that the key stakeholder to actually work on the knowledge transfer? So I guess we need to think a little bit more about who these actors of knowledge transfer should be, because I don't think everybody can be one.
Yeah, no, if I may come in, so I think they're both kind of linked in terms of that evidence point and that knowledge transfer point. I don't think it's fair to say we don't have an evidence base. It's probably more to say we've got a growing and emerging evidence base. So as the Environment Agency, we published the learning from the previous 15 million NFM investment programme. And what we're looking to do is to publish an update. What we've got at the moment is called the Working with Natural Processes Evidence Directory. And we're looking to publish an update on that later this year. So I would very much watch this space, because I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to share learning, not just from that programme, but from research programmes more widely and a much more extensive literature review. So yeah, thinking about how we can translate that evidence into tools that can create that logic chain between what the intervention and what the benefit is. So yeah, absolutely, that's an area that the Environment Agency is very active in, and yeah, looking to provide updates later in this year. And yes, we will very much be looking to share that. But I think one of the key drivers to us doing that has been to kind of promote confidence in funding decisions, so that we can say to government, look, this is the evidence that we've grown about what you get from investment in our instance natural flood management. So yeah, to be able to, I suppose, build the ability for government to confidently invest in those types of schemes. So yeah, one of those key beneficiaries of that piece of work. Absolutely, we want to share it kind of horizontally across peers, but we absolutely want to use it to build government's confidence in these interventions as well.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Chris, you have been patiently waiting, so over to you.
Just a couple of quick points on the financing piece and stakeholders. So, different ends of the delivery pipeline, I suppose. So, water companies are going to be big buyers and of nature-based solutions, but that is funded by debt typically. So we're going to investor markets to borrow money to deliver our program of investments, and increasingly investors are looking to invest in things that are contributing to addressing the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. Typically in the past, when we've gone for green bonds, that's been really sold heavily on low carbon construction, but nature-based solutions are a brilliant way of demonstrating to investors that they can be investing things which are nature positive in the future. So the more of those we can do and package, the better sell it is to the debt markets, and that means we're probably borrowing money at more attractive rates as well. So it's financially good for us. At the other end, when it comes to delivering nature-based solutions, particularly our treatment wetland program, we're almost exclusively needing to work with farmers to deliver that, because we rarely have the land to build them ourselves. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that a tactic is to work with the farmer and think about how a nature-based solution with the farmer as part of their business as a whole, and what is that farmer doing about nature markets and other opportunities for revenue generation as the basic payment system comes to an end. So actually it's about selling the wider benefits that the nature-based solutions can provide to his or her business plan for their farmer at large. If we just go in looking to buy the land or lease the land in a sort of traditional commercial sense, that seems to be, at least the evidence that we gathered over the last few years of building them, to be a less successful tactic. So that's how we're going to be looking at delivering them more in the future.
Okay, thank you, Chris. That's really interesting, the fact that nature-based solutions should actually fit into the business plan of the farmers, and should provide for that business plan. Perhaps it's not always considered, and it brings up that additional consideration that perhaps we miss in some of the solutions. Mark, over to you. And as we move over to you and you highlight your point, we are also going to move to the next question, because I think it's spot on for you. So we were talking about stakeholders and what is needed to support collaboration between them. And you have highlighted in your introduction that it is necessary to link landowners and land managers. So in addition to the point that you are going to highlight, if you could elaborate on what is actually required to establish that relationship between landowners and land managers, and what we need to do to support them on the implementation of nature-based solutions.
I will try on the second point, and on the first point, it's quite simple. It's really building on what Chris was talking about. Essentially, that one of the most effective ways of farmers adopting practices is through peer-to-peer learning, and therefore working with groups of farmers with demonstrations by farmers of how processes have worked in the past is often the most effective way of it being adopted by others. In terms of working between landowners and land managers, where you've got tenants, for example, it's important for the tenant to understand that they have some security in what's being suggested, that their business is going to work, that they have the skills necessary to be able to carry out what's being asked, and that what is being suggested is actually not simply, I mean, one of the challenges that we have is that a lot of the schemes available at the moment are based on an income foregone basis, whereas actually this needs to make business sense in terms of actually this is going to be a better option for the tenant to adopt than simply something which is going to be an exchange one thing for another. There has to be an incentive to go forward. I think working within, for example, the land agent community to work out what the heads of terms look like for the types of agreements necessary between tenants and landowners is an important part of getting this to work in practice on the ground. So it's the value issue needs to be addressed for the landowner in terms of what this does to the value of the land and long-term value, and it's the what does this do for my business in terms of the land manager needs to make sense for them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then key actors as well for that knowledge transfer are going to be people that have learned how to do, how to implement nature-based solutions, colleagues, peers that other farmers trust on a daily basis, and then that knowledge is kind of passed mouth to mouth in a way, rather than actually having a specific agency transferring the knowledge. So it could be a double edge, an agency transferring knowledge, an organization transferring knowledge, but also colleagues, peers, bringing that knowledge into the table. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mark. Anybody has any specific points on that second question that we have posed there on what is needed to support collaboration between stakeholders? Oh, Catherine. Catherine just went, yes, I do. Yeah, over to you.
So from my experience, I think it's really important to get these schemes off the ground. It's really important to have somebody that's embedded fairly locally that has the time and I guess the funded time to coordinate between the various different stakeholders, because there are many different people involved and there's potentially different funding sources and you're talking to lots of different landowners. There's numerous different conversations that need to be had and issues that need to be worked through, and I think it's really important to have a funded coordinator to do that.
Okay, Kath, so that means that we actually need to cater for that funding. So the financial resources are not just for the nature-based solutions. They should also tackle that silo breaking and collaboration if we really want this to materialize. Thank you. Rob, I can see that your hand is up as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to reinforce that really, I mean, so the Resilient Watersheds program, working around, 40 programs across 13 countries globally, they all do exactly that. So the kind of water investment program model starts off by establishing a program manager and a project team, bringing those stakeholders to map it, doing a kind of situational analysis, bringing together the stakeholders and providing that core support. And water funds is one mechanism that's widely used by the Nature Conservancy, and that at the heart of that is generating enough revenue to support that coordination function, because it's so key. The other really key bit of learning, and it plays out in Norfolk as well as it does anywhere else in the world, is pilots are really powerful. Having one or two places where you're actually doing something and getting beyond kind of the theoretical, I think is really important. And then kind of slightly going back to the previous discussion, but around the finance piece and the kind of what actually supports people to take action is bridging finance. So it's all very well thinking about the water company's finance, and Chris talked about the business plan for the farmers, absolutely, support that. But also in terms of taking that, who takes the risk in terms of taking the land out of production, putting the spades in the ground, that gap between delivering the project and seeing the finance flow to the landowner I'm talking about here, providing that confidence and that bridging finance. I think that's really important as well. And these are all roles that can be played by a kind of water investment program kind of function. I'm not saying it's the only model, but I think that coordinating function is really important.
So I guess, Rob, that links to the concept of risk. So the farmer in a way needs to see that the risk is minimized, so that there is a return to investment in a way, or at least that there is no law, so that they can actually say, yes, with confidence, I want to go down that path.
Number one bit of feedback from our work in Norfolk was exactly that. Was like, yeah, this is great, but am I going to, you know, I've got so many choices to make. Why, you know, am I going to take the risk on this if the money might not, especially given all of the policy? I mean, nobody's mentioned policy certainty, but I mean, given all the policy uncertainty we've existed in the last 3 years, you know, the markets for nutrients and BNG have been in, you know, oh, they're going to save us, oh, they're going to, you know, they're no longer here, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, de-risking that for the landowner is really key.
Thank you, Rob. Amina.
So it's all the supporting functions, I think, in terms of what's needed to support collaboration. It's more than the collaboration. It's how do you get these things to go from options out there in the landscape all the way to delivery, all the way to revenue being generated, to pay farmers, landowners, to delivering requirements and all of that stuff. There's a whole bunch of supporting functions that need to be addressed. From the, as Kat was saying, the conveners, who convenes, who brokers the relationships, who brings people to the table, who looks at what the options are that can deliver. It's almost like going shopping, really, window shopping. Who puts the window shopping together? And in the UK, at least, we've looked at a whole bunch of types of catchment governance, but the simplest approach to this is the catchment-based approach, CABA partnerships, who are out there, are part of the community, are delivering the work on the ground, are linking and convening stakeholders around the table, but they don't have a mandate that comes from policy or regulators or government to be able to do this in a much more structured way, and they're not funded properly to do this. And when it comes to, it's not just the convening, is once, you know, things are delivered, how are they maintained? How is risk managed? Who reports and verifies that these things are delivering what they're meant to be delivering? You know, it's all of these supporting functions that are not funded. And sometimes when the funding does come, it's very capital driven, is to build staff to get the spade on the ground. It isn't to fund all of these things that enable collaboration to happen, and to make farmers understand what's the risk, what's in it for them, to the window shopping that I've just mentioned, to the buyers, basically, the water companies, local authorities, and the people that should be investing in these things, to how do we drive investment for finance sector as well. So there are the supporting functions. From a Rivers Trust perspective and CABA perspective, we really struggle because that's where we operate, is in that space that nobody wants to fund, or is not structurally funded in a structured way. And it's not given the right mandate. So I think there's huge gaps around the governance of these things, the brokerage of relationships, collaboration, funding, and how to make some of these schemes investable, you know, as investable propositions that can attract buyers and funders, and how do you report back on that investment as well and on the requirements. So how do you get that? How do you get that off the ground? So that, and people call it catchment governance, we've had catchment system operators, lots of other things out there, lots of fancy other models, but ultimately it comes back to, if you've got a structure on the ground that does some of these things, then you will see the investable propositions, you will see the investable pipelines, the water company cycles come in, and water companies should become buyers of these things, come and go as needed, and regulators will start to build trust and confidence and understand where regulation can incentivize these things. But what we don't have is that infrastructure out there that convenes and brokers relationships and understanding of how to develop these investable propositions.
Okay.
And who funds it? I don't know.
That's always the question, I guess. So what you are saying, Amina, is that there is a need for a framework that actually guides the end user or the end users, because usually it's a collaborative approach, through the whole process, not just through the implementation and the design of the nature-based solution, but also from the policy and governance and the finance and then monitoring and everything else that comes with it. That framework is not in place. It seems to be quite cut into places or into distinct sections that have not been linked together. And at the end of the day, the fact that there's no whole process stakeholders linked together into perhaps a single document or a single protocol brings that perception of risk, of uncertainty back to the table, and makes people feel insecure about whether this is going to work or not. And at the same time, that reflects on the governance and on the finance side of things.
Yeah, and on the trust. So I don't know. I love the way you, the brain of an academic works. Is that you thought framework and try to put some structure in there, which is brilliant. But in many ways, is what's missing is that infrastructure, that sort of capability. And people talked about capacity and capability, which is something that we're looking at very closely. What's the capacity to do this in a structured way on the ground? From experience, and obviously I would say that, but happy to be challenged. We already have some of that on the ground through the catchment partnerships. They need the capacity, capability, but also need the mandate. So in many ways, the core of that framework or infrastructure is out there. It's already working at place scale. It's already convening the relationships. It's already bringing schemes forward. They just need the capability and the capacity to keep doing that, and the mandate and the funding to make them sustainable. At the moment, it's very small pickings from DEFRA, and mostly, as Rob has put on the chat, they rely on philanthropy, don't they, and revenues that come and go. So if we can sustainably invest in that, I think we'll see things flowing, and then the money will come. At least from the pilots I've piloted, the money comes when you've got these things in place.
Thank you, Amina. Great. Let's now jump to the next question, which is going to bring standards into the game, into the play. I'm going to pose the question. So the next question is around the standards. How do you actually balance the call for standardization of nature-based solutions with the flexibility needed for their application at the local level? So obviously there is a need for standards, there is a need to understand, and we have already seen that, the evidence, and quantify in a way the benefit of nature-based solutions, but at the same time we don't want that to create a burden for the implementation of nature-based solutions at any level, but specifically at local level. So how do we actually balance the two things? Rob, over to you.
Well, I'll just make a really basic observation. I think there in the analytical framework we're developing for our global piece of work, we made a decision to split nature-based solutions between treatment wetlands, so primary, secondary, tertiary treatment wetlands, or quaternary even, and polishing wetlands at the sewage treatment works, from catchment interventions. And I think it's probably much easier. Well, no, I'm not going to say it's easier. I think there's probably more effort being put into standardizing our understanding of how we design treatment wetlands, because it's a relatively controlled environment, and it's, we know what different types of treatment wetlands are and what have you. I mean, whether we've succeeded in understanding all the right design factors and what that means for performance, but that's a thing that you can control and monitor at an outlet, and that's relatively straightforward. I think standardization in those catchment interventions becomes much more difficult. But I just think it's worth differentiating between those two things, because I think they pose different technical challenges.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. Any further views on? Yes, I can see Amina. Over to you, Amina.
I'm sorry, I think I'm going to monopolize the conversation a bit.
Okay.
On the Mainstream Nature-Based Solutions project, as we were kind of putting together the collecting views from many stakeholders and putting together the proposal, this kept coming back in terms of nature-based solutions can be so landscape specific, so place specific, that they need to be accommodated to the requirements of the place. So it's difficult to standardize them. However, there's lots of examples, and Rob has already mentioned, how do you put, wetlands or reed beds, as people like to call them, in treatment works? How do you do sustainable drainage systems? There's lots of ways to standardize these things. The Environment Agency is working with natural processes report as well. So there's lots of ways to do NFM, wetlands and other things that can be standardized. but also provide the flexibility. It has to be about the local understanding of where you're trying to implement them. It's almost like framework categorization processes that can be put in place for people to understand what the problem we have at the moment is. When you've done it in one place, it's difficult sometimes for the regulator to accept that it can be transferable to another, and the goalposts can change. I may have done this in the northwest in Cumbria, but actually in the east of England, it may not just apply. And it's difficult to do that. There's got to be an accepted framework by all that takes that on board. A great part of this, and when we were putting together the proposal, the funder themselves, Ofwat said to us, when people bring their spend and their schemes and their evidence, it's difficult to compare like for like. So one of the things that they wanted us to look at was a total value framework. How do you standardize a common value framework so that then when the regulators themselves are comparing how people are implementing these things, they can do it in a transferable way? So that's another thing we're trying to do, is create a framework by which the solutions can still be flexible and place specific, but provides commonalities across how value is assessed, how the benefits are assessed, how the design of certain features is assessed as well. So it's not easy, and we're finding that it's quite challenging. But it comes back to risk, actually, and creating a risk framework that makes it quite clear where the risk lies when you're building an asset that may be in third-party land, and therefore subject to other people's interfering with it. And that sort of thing. It's not easy, but that's where we're looking at. It's more of a framework rather than nailing the specific solution as you do with tanks and treatment works, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so we are not actually, based on what you are saying, we are not actually looking at standardizing the nature-based solutions. We are looking at standardizing the process and the steps that are being followed within the process in such a way that later on that framework can be transferred to any part in the country, but also the solutions that are being implemented can be compared from nature-based solution to nature-based solution, and then some conclusions can be reached as to which ones are working better in specific contexts and which ones are perhaps better placed in other areas.
That's right. So we're not creating a tool, we're creating the toolbox, if you like, and then people can pick those tools accordingly. Yeah.
Thank you, Amina. Chris, over to you.
It touches on the question about policy, and it touches on the question around monitoring and evaluation as well, doesn't it? I think the sort of frame from both Rob and Mina is spot on there in terms of helping us develop a process so that we can have shared confidence of what we're going to do and get agreement from all the key stakeholders. Standardization is obviously super helpful because it gives everybody a bit of confidence that what we're going to try and deliver is hopefully going to work. But then within the context of being able to locally agree, perhaps say with a local authority or with the Environment Agency on a particular solution, if you're going to try and push it that bit harder, I guess what we don't want, we want an enabling environment where nature-based solutions are tried as much as possible, because that, if we're monitoring them effectively, is going to help with the standardization question. So it's how do we encourage lots of NBS to happen so we have that discovery rather than chilling it right from the start, so we never get quite enough scale to actually prove the efficacy of nature-based solutions.
That's actually really important, and perhaps there is a need to look at which parts of the framework should be allocated to a specific entities. So, for example, the farmer that is implementing a nature-based solution is going to be interested in implementing the solution, but may not have the resources to do the next step, which will be the monitoring or the evaluation, whatever comes next. So then, do we need to look for different actors to implement different steps of that standardized framework? And I guess we don't know yet because we don't have the framework, but it's something that perhaps we need to explore in the future.
Yeah, it partly comes down to what's the point of it, right? If we're meeting a permit need and we've got to get a solution in the ground quick enough to meet a permit need confidently and the permit is something that we're going to be regulated very hard over, and obviously, the scrutiny of the water industry is very much on, performance in that sort of thing. That means one thing. If I'm doing catchment management in a catchment to reduce the risk of water quality issues at a water treatment works, that's something kind of different, right? So you have different approaches for different things, and to a degree, you can leave it to the key actors to decide what is the most effective way, or what the risk appetite, how that risk appetite might vary according to the the implications of getting these things wrong.
And again, that will link to the risks and the consequences of perhaps getting those solutions wrong to the public, for example, or the environment. Okay, thank you, Chris. Tom, I think you are next.
Thank you. Yeah, so just picking everything up then, I think everyone's kind of covered what I was going to say, but from my perspective, I think, as you said, I think it's needed. It's needed as a starting point to get people on board, to get that buy-in, to open up those opportunities for partnership working and different funding sources and things like that. And to me, I'd see it as being a bare minimum sort of thing, or a worst case scenario. So if you have a standard for a specific nature-based solution, you look up, it's based on all the kind of trials and pilots and things and all the variations that have been done across the country. And then there's the kind of the known worst case scenario performance and benefits that are delivered. And then that is used as a starting point, again, using those other variations, different designs, different all sorts of things. And then you tailor it from there. So that's how I kind of see it being useful, at least anyway.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Excellent. I think, Rob, I think it's now your turn.
Just very, so Tom, brilliant segue into what I was going to say, which was, I was just musing that there are actually some design standards which were issued by Natural England for nutrient neutrality. And if we look at the impact of those standards, their evaluation of the performance of half a dozen different types of nature-based solution interventions, they've essentially said that they're because of and this is a really good illustration of kind of why risk appetite matters. So they're looking at compliance with the HABS regs. So they've taken the most precautionary, the worst possible performance, the most precautionary approach, stuck the finger in the air and come up with a number. And essentially those standards have made it more or less unviable to do anything for phosphorus with nature-based solutions in those catchments. And so you have to monitor for everything. And we've just looked at all bells and whistles kind of monitoring program. It's probably 10 times as much as building the nature-based solutions. So you kind of you get to a place where you kind of go, is that, how do we get out of that bind?
Okay.
But I think that so actually, we could use the same evidence base and go, oh, if I'm a corporate looking to do offset my nutrient emissions and I'm going to build 100 of these things, I might take the median of the performance. And actually, suddenly, looks really cheap and easy to do. And actually, I don't need, I'm only going to post monitor 5% of all of the things I'm going to do, because I've got a completely different risk appetite. And that goes back to Chris's point about what you're trying to achieve and what are the regulatory or non-regulatory consequences of failure. Neither of those are the wrong thing to do. And they all start with the same evidence base. You just come up with a very different standard. And I haven't got my head around how you fix that, but I do think it's something that really cuts across collective action, because we can all be investing in buffer strips and we can all be claiming very different results. And then just to throw into the pot with that is one of those things then becomes scale. So if I do one buffer strip at 100 meters, I'm somewhere between 5 and I'm 95% certain it's going to be somewhere between the bottom end of the the lower 5 percentile and the upper 9. If I deliver 100 of those things, all collectively those 100 are going to tend towards the mean. And so the scale at which we assess performance and the scale at which we assess success is also really critical in terms of what standards we apply. And again, at the moment, what we tend to be doing is kind of taking a very granular scale in terms of understanding what success looks like. and maybe for different and that might be right if you're trying to demonstrate nutrient neutrality for this house I've built here.
Mhm.
But if I were to look at catchment health, I might be happier at kind of zooming out and going, well, I've delivered hundreds of these things, and as a collective, the performance is more like overall is going to be somewhere near the mean. Someone who's much better at maths and modelling could then work out what the consequences is. But I feel these are kind of knotty problems, but they're not entirely impossible to think about.
Okay, so I guess I can see it from a mathematical point of view. So you may want to have some more relaxed standards when it comes to local implementation of nature-based solutions. And those local solutions may have a level of uncertainty that is more relaxed than perhaps what you will accept in the combined outcome of the catchment, if that makes sense. So that gives more freedom to the local implementations, always assuming and quantifying for the fact that the overall uncertainty in the catchment needs to be within a specific threshold of tolerance. And that could give the flexibility to local implementation of nature-based solutions. So yeah, I can see it mathematically, I can see it being implemented. Thank you, Rob. Okay, any further points on this particular point? Tom, yes, over to you.
Go on, sorry, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works here.
Oh, no.
This kind of based on a conversation I had with some councillors a while ago, but I think that the definition of success is always very binary. You succeed or you fail. There's not as much consideration of improvements as there should be. So if you do something, you are generally making an improvement. It might not be what you wanted to do, but you have made an improvement. So it's, yes, that doesn't fit the kind of cost benefit grant kind of side of things, but as I was saying to the councillor, that everything you do is a snapshot in time. Things change, climate's changing, land use changes, so many things change. You're never going to be able to fit the solution completely to the future. And that's the kind of the fear of failure, isn't it? It's a case of we want to do something now and we want to fix it and walk away and go and do something else. And that's a kind of a philosophical problem, I suppose, isn't it? That a lot of the people who are paying the bills basically have. But yeah, just throwing that out there, I suppose, as a bit of a thought. And nature-based solutions are always a bit of a step. Even a lot of them can do what you need to do, but even if they don't, they're a step in the right direction and they're making things better. And I personally think they're a good investment because of the multi-benefits they bring.
Okay, so I think that spanner is going to help me with the next question, actually, Tom, which is how do we link this to the perception of risk? Because we understand that any nature-based solution is going to bring an enhancement and improvement to the environment. But if we are uncertain about how much that improvement is and whether that can be classified as economic benefit in a way, then the level of risk is not properly mapped. I'm just going to place the question there. In the meantime, in the chat. In the meantime, Kath, I can see your hand up. So let's address your point, and then we will go back to that question in the chat.
Well, it was really just building on what Tom says, but I think maybe it's relevant for the risk conversation as well.
Oh, lovely.
So I think in terms of monitoring outcomes of schemes, it's really important to have a kind of adaptive approach so that you're monitoring, adapting, adjusting and reviewing. But I'm conscious that may not work for all outcomes and for meeting certain regulatory requirements. But I do wonder whether there, for certain types of approaches, there could be some regulatory framework that provides a bit of flexibility.
So
that's like.
Yeah, that's the thing, that we know what we have an understanding, but it's difficult for us to picture it as yet because we have not put it together. But I think we are giving shape to that framework that we have been mentioning, that framework that needs to consider these standards, that needs to be looking at different scales, as Rob mentioned. That framework that Amina highlighted, that needs to be looking at the overall process to make sure that everything is just being taken into account from the beginning, the design of the solution to the monitoring, the implementation and the monitoring and validation of that solution. And at the same time, Kath, what you are saying is that that framework needs to be adaptive. So we are giving here all the tips to the development of that new framework for nature-based solution. Okay, excellent. So let's have a look at the question, which is now focusing on the risk side of things. So how can the perception of risk surrounding nature-based solutions be improved among key stakeholders? So if you have any ideas. Laura.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I guess fundamentally, nature-based solutions are intended to mitigate a risk, aren't they? Whether that be a flood risk, whether that be a risk around pollution of water, whether it's around kind of managing water levels to make sure that water is available at more sparse times of the year. So there's the risk on both sides. There's the what are the risks of delivering nature-based solutions, but there's also the what are the opportunities that nature-based solutions can have to manage risks. And I guess I see quite a lot of the opportunities with the latter, so kind of focusing on how can we build our evidence base around the multiple benefits that nature-based solutions can provide in order to manage a whole host of risks. So yeah, an example would be the Working with Natural Processes evidence directory, which looks at a whole series of NFM interventions across the catchment. So it covers kind of coastal things like what you can do around beach management, manage realignment, to kind of floodplain woodland planting, river restoration, to things right at the top of the catchment in terms of woodland planting, leaky barriers, managing runoff pathways, etc. But what that does is kind of looks at, for these different types of interventions, what are the opportunities for them to deliver benefits? So, for example, how can river restoration benefit water quality, habitat, climate regulation, low flows, air quality? So I think a lot of the way that we can kind of address that conversation about risk is almost to flip it into a benefit conversation, to say let's build our understanding of all these different types of interventions and build the evidence around kind of what benefits they're best suited to deliver. So not all nature-based solutions will deliver kind of all benefits, but if we can kind of get an understanding of that whole wheel of benefits and which benefits which are best placed to deliver, I think that's really helpful, and that's certainly something that's been really well received in the Working with Natural Processes evidence directory that's been published to date, but also that we're looking to update later on in the year. So I think, yeah, kind of flipping it from looking at risks to looking at opportunities, I think is really strong.
So that's a really good point, Laura, because what you are highlighting is perhaps the complexity of the risk assessment of this particular nature-based solution approach. So the risk needs to be looked from the point of view of the risk of the solution not working, so the risk that a farmer may incur if the solution is not working, but at the same time is the risk of not implementing the solution and how that affects flooding or the water quality or so on and so forth. So it's that complexity of risk that we need to be able to merge together. It's not as simple as breaking it down into what happens if it doesn't work, how does this affect the farmer, and how does it go if we don't implement it. Is the interaction of all these different risks that need to be merged, and at the moment we don't know how to do it. Okay, thank you, Laura. I think next one is, well, I see lots of hands now. Amina, over to you.
I think it picks up on some of the conversations from Ethne and Rob on the chat, is about the sort of risk is about the trade-offs as well. So if nature-based solutions deliver multiple benefits, and let's just work under the assumption that if we put nature first is a no-regret solution, And if you're designing for multiple benefits, and you know, not a lot of expertise around designing for multiple benefits out there. If you're designing for multiple benefits, we have to acknowledge that part of that is accepting the trade-offs. Mm-hmm. What's the best outcome from the landscape is going to come from accepting trade-offs. Now, that is a really difficult compromise to make when part of those multiple benefits is to deliver regulatory requirements like water quality or delivering risk reduction around flooding. So it's the ability to accept some of those trade-offs as part of that delivery mechanism. It's at the moment it can be quite prohibitive, and people are just not willing to explore some of the opportunities, even when you flip it, Laura, as you were saying, from into benefits and opportunities. There's an opportunity to deliver multiple benefits, immediately becomes about, yes, but, you know, if it's at risk of a community flooding, if this goes terribly wrong, or at the risk of failing compliance to water quality requirements, then nobody's willing to negotiate those trade-offs. That's where it becomes difficult.
So I guess, Amina, the additional point is that those benefits and risks affect different people. So it's not the same person always receiving the impact in a way. If the farmer doesn't get the return to investment, it affects the farmer. But perhaps the farmer is not concerned about the fact that the nature-based solution is going to help the community not to get flooded. So those benefits are affecting different stakeholders, and therefore it's very difficult to bring everything together, isn't it? So we need a solution for that as well. Okay, Tom.
I think kind of getting stakeholders on board, there's multi-facets to this because there's so many different types of stakeholders, but from personal experience, it's been a lot about kind of the engagement and the understanding, which I mean, I kind of touched on. It's about people knowing what the risks are and what they could be, and different people see different risks with different schemes and different projects in different locations. So it's trying to bring all of those together and raise that awareness and understanding of them. I found co-design as well has been quite good, depending on the level of it. Sometimes you can be a bit more open and give people a bit more kind of scope. Sometimes it's a case of saying we want to do some swale attenuation area system. How big do you want it? Where do you want it? Sort of thing. But that really helps get people involved, and then they can kind of steer it to the benefits they prefer or would like to see more of as well. And yeah, just showing off case studies and examples and getting people out to see them. That is, well, that's better than anything I found for getting people on board, so they can go and see what's happened, learn what's worked well, look what hasn't worked well, and go from there.
Okay. So we go back to those pilot studies that they seem to be essential to demonstrate the benefits. And I think your
but
point...
we need to move away from pilots as well, rather than just doing pilots and pilots and pilots, and actually, yeah, do schemes that aren't pilots. Yeah.
Okay, and I think your point again brings us back to the knowledge transfer and the fact that different stakeholders need to learn about how the risks are handled and who are the people actually receiving and paying for the risks. So that will require engagement in terms of knowledge transfer as well. Okay, thank you, Tom. Mark, over to you.
I was just going to offer some reflections, which is what we've seen from the carbon market for farming, which is that unless there's a good, strong regulatory framework around the different offers that are made on nature-based solutions for farmers, for example, landowners, it becomes very difficult to gauge whether this is a good deal for me, and there becomes a general concern about accepting any deal, particularly where it locks up land for a long period of time, without having that consistency and confidence that a strong regulatory framework around the different offers that are made brings to the farmer. So I just wanted to add that in terms of being able to manage risk for those people who are actually delivering on the ground.
Okay, so an additional caveat there, making sure that those approaches are catered, are fit for purpose in a way. Okay, thank you, Mark. I can see that there are lots of comments, and I'm afraid I cannot read them all at the same time. So if I'm missing anything, please just raise your hand. I can see a comment from Rob that says trust versus risk. Yes, would you like to comment on that, Rob?
Just to say that, so there's lots of things we can do to mitigate financial risk, regulatory risk, but actually one of the most fundamental things is trust. So like at the moment, obviously in the UK or in England, particularly the water industry has a very low kind of trust with its public and regulators, media, and therefore is backed into a really tight corner. So, you know, there are consequences that can't be mitigated purely through kind of mechanistic measures, and so that's going to put them in an awkward position. But equally, you know, with landowners, you know, trust plays a huge part in terms of all it's not just land, everywhere. We all, you know, trust. I'm looking to get some building work done. I'd much rather have a mate of mine recommend someone to me because I would trust them more. You know, I'm willing to take the risk, and I think that piece around building trust is as important as all of the other things around how we mitigate risk.
Thank you. Okay, Rob, thanks. Charlie.
Yeah, just a really quick point that's got me thinking after Rob's point just then is just around, does this sometimes speak to the need for sort of a really efficient and fit for purpose regulatory regime around sort of enforcement of you know, various acts of legislation and in terms of water pollution incidents and so on and so forth, so that if funders are looking to commit sort of capital to these sort of projects, is that they want to kind of know that there's that, you know, there's money behind the enforcement of, you know, of regulation. I think I can't remember what the numbers were on, you know, kind of your chances of getting visited by a sort of an EA enforcement officer sort of on farm at one point, you know, one in however many years. So it's just, I'm just using that as an example. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's that kind of just making sure there's actually just that bedrock of sort of regulatory enforcement to make sure that actually that will just end up building up trust in these schemes' ability to sort of deliver, especially with multiple partners with multiple different objectives and regulatory drivers. So just a small addition, I think.
So that enforcement is around the enforcement of a particular nature-based solution when a problem is identified, or is it around the enforcement of monitoring, enforcement of validation and quantification of benefit? Where does it fit exactly?
It was actually more, all of those sound good, but actually it was more around sort of regulatory enforcement. So sort of environmental enforcement.
Okay. Excellent. Any further points on that question? Okay, so let's move to the next one, which we have touched upon a little bit, but just in case there are any further thoughts, how can investment be leveraged? Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, just a few thoughts, I suppose. It kind of means when we're talking about investment, what is it that sort of we mean? Do we mean sort of more grant funding pots going into it, or more sort of corporate CSR, ESG, or are we talking about investment for a financial return from financial services and investors and so on? So there's sort of slight differences between, but I think most of kind of what we've been through, if we're wanting to sort of scale investment into nature-based solutions, I think a huge amount of what we've sort of talked about will start to bring that kind of investment further. I think that kind of trust and risk and the sort of coordinated approach and just building that confidence around nature-based solutions, just from the kind of private sector, I think just building on all of those, I think is really key if we're going to sort of leverage further investment into this. And I think when we're talking about pilots and actually getting projects in the ground, I think I kind of agree with what Tom's saying as far as actually let's really start getting these projects in the ground, because we need to start building this track record of projects that are able to attract finance from traditional sources and sort of newer innovative financing mechanisms. I think, especially if we're thinking about investors, that sort of that track record is so key. And it is sort of even before that step, I think we really need to build the business case for the sort of private sector as a whole and different businesses, which we've already touched on in this session. So yeah, there's just sort of a few initial thoughts.
Thank you, Charlie. Chris, over to you.
I think one thing I think would be interesting to see if it has an effect is the TNFD, task force nature related financial disclosures, and whether that is going to enable businesses to have better visibility about their risks when it comes to nature depletion, whether that then encourages the investment in nature-based solutions and in nature recovery more generally. And we're on that journey ourselves. I think secondly, already discussed earlier, is around the conveners and who can bring the buyers and sellers together across the landscape to actually enable trade to happen. We've been involved for a long time now in landscape enterprise networks in the east of England, which has brought together water companies and agri-food in the main to pay for interventions on farmland. Millions of pounds worth of investment annually that has driven, but it's been very, very, very hard and continues to be a real challenge. Final thing I think is also scale. I've heard plenty of times now that these sort of investor markets don't get out of bed unless there's like £100 million worth of investment to put into a landscape. Honestly, I really don't know the truth of that ultimately, but if that is the case, how do we bring together all of that at that sort of scale in order to deliver, bearing in mind that up till now most of that sort of action has been done by very small environmental NGOs like the Wildlife Trust Movement, Rivers Trust, RSPB, all relatively small. If this is going for prime time and we need to put order of magnitude more investment into it, we need much more project on the ground, much more project delivery. So that whole scale piece is going to be critical as well, it seems.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And I think it's Laura now.
Yeah, I think on the point about leveraging investment, one of the things that it's important to look at is where is investment most difficult to find. And one of the points that we've picked up in terms of what are the barriers to implementing natural flood management is that although the capital funding is relatively, and I'd say that with quite a pinch of salt, easy to access. One of the barriers, particularly around farmers, landowners, and community groups' willingness to develop nature-based solutions, is the challenge of ongoing management and maintenance. So one of the things that we've been focusing on within the Environment Agency is how can we develop our FWR capital funding to complement the design of the new environmental land management schemes as a funding source that can enable that longer term management as well. So I think it's what we've been doing is thinking about not just how you can leverage funding in general, but kind of what are the gaps in the funding landscape and how can we be active in trying to address those. So that's one of the things that we've been doing, particularly picking up on the feedback that it's not just funding in general that needs to be leveraged, but management and maintenance funding is a key thing to focus on.
Thank you. Lovely, Laura. Thank you very much. And Kath.
Hello. Well, I think I'd agree with a lot of what Laura said and Chris has just said, actually. So just building on that with TNFD, I think frameworks such as that are really important, but until they become mandatory, then I don't really feel that businesses are going to really feel the pressure to address their business risks through nature. So I'm looking at that and hoping that it will turn into something positive, but I'm not sure it will without the sort of financial regulation in place. And then I think, as a build on what Laura was saying, that I think that policy certainty from government and certainty of the ELMS funding is really important, so that it's understood that there's a certain amount of government funding going into the system that's helping to develop those complicated schemes and perhaps fund the unfundable, which then gives the confidence for the private sector then to come in and pick off the benefits which are easily measured and which are very relevant to them. I think continuing to build the evidence base is really important too. I mean, there is a lot of evidence out there, but continued monitoring, sharing of the data across a wide platform, so that we've got this kind of cadre of data which is really demonstrating loud and clear in a number of different contexts what the benefits are of nature-based solutions.
Okay. Thank you, Kath. That's really useful. I think it brings all these different points that we have seen for the last question together. We have 7 minutes left. With this in mind, I'm going to place the last question in the chat. I'm just going to hear your views on that question, and then we are going to wrap up. Our question is, how do we economically quantify, demonstrate, and communicate the return to investment of nature-based solutions? Tom?
And I'll jump in.
Go on.
I think that quantifying is the $1 million question. And if we can crack that, then it makes things 10 times easier, doesn't it? If you can put a number on everything, it's so much easier to sell it to investors. But in terms of demonstrating, I think we can do that with all the examples we've got, and having a big collective pot of those is going to be the best thing, which we don't really have at the moment. There's lots of different pots and lots of different examples. And communication is going to all be about the partnership and kind of doing that through the journey. So from start to finish, I think is getting the people who've invested involved in it, and all of the, the process of doing comms as part of the works anyway, keep them involved with that. So yeah, it's a tough one, definitely. But I don't think it's impossible. It comes down to a kind of question of scale as well. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems is how kind of big things are, because we've got some examples where we're doing a nature-based solution, it's relatively small into public open space. We're getting Asda to get involved because they're right next door. We're going to create some seating. They're interested because people will be in the area and they'll stay around longer, so they're happy to get involved. But if you're doing more of a catchment-based scale, people might not be as interested. It's a bit harder for them to see kind of benefits and keep track of things. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that's worked out.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Rob, I think it's your turn.
Yeah, very quickly. I'll be slightly controversial and say that I think sometimes we over-obsess on valuing total economic values, and we lose focus on what are the things which are investable. And so I think sometimes you get really, really excited about a huge cost-benefit number, or benefit-cost ratio rather, but actually an awful lot of those benefits have no route to monetization. And so what I would say to people is, let's focus on the things, so I think things like the total value framework and some of those broad pricing value tools are really, really important. But the place you want to really put your effort is on those things where you're actually going to derive financial flow, because that's the thing that's gonna make your nature-based solutions program investable. And like, it's always a classic example is really keeping an eye on affordability, because fundamentally I think people get really frustrated because they have this huge benefit cost ratio and they wonder why nobody's putting their money in when no one's got any money in their budgets. It fails the affordability test. So just being really, really clear about where the money's going to come from, focus your efforts there. And so the amount of effort you put into valuing stuff really has to be around what point are you trying to make to who.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. Charlie, 1 minute left so that we can close up.
Yeah, so I'd sort of put my hand down halfway through, Rod, because it was similar to kind of point I was going to make, but I think it goes back to the kind of the work and the effort that you put into right sort of at the beginning to kind of identify exactly how much are these outcomes worth to, if you're looking at the private sector, say how much is it worth to each of those different private sector entities, and they're going to be different between different, because all have different drivers. So yeah, I think that's really putting that work in at the early stages, I think will massively help.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Charlie. And with that note, we are going to bring the roundtable to a close. Thank you very much for all your input. Obviously, we have had lots of ideas coming through, and we will summarize those in some way or form, either report or in a video. I believe all the information will be available, the roundtable will be available in YouTube, if I recall correctly. Yes, I can see Edney saying yes. So you will hear from us and the outcomes of this roundtable in due course. Thank you very much for your feedback and for your positive engagement. It has been much appreciated. You have made all the experience really valuable and a pleasure for me to chair the session. And I hope I will see you soon in another roundtable. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Great to see
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.